welcome back to our ISG HR Market Pulse. I'm Kelly Will, and I'm joined by my colleagues Stacey Cadigan and Julie Fernandez, and this week we're talking about returning workforce strategies. So following last week's discussion on onboarding, we put out a poll around what's driving organizations' onboarding needs. As a reminder, you can participate in any of our polls through our digital HR connections page on LinkedIn. So that was one of the sources for the consolidated poll results that I'm about to show you now. And we invite you to check out that site and participate in our polls each week. We definitely want to hear from you. So on to this week's poll results. The question we asked was, which of the following will drive your onboarding needs between now and the end of the year? And the leading response was new hires and employees with 50% of responses. Followed by 30% responding that return to work or rehires would be driving the needs. 20% then on freelancers. And the last piece, the last option we had was around temporary labor. We had 0 responses here, which is a bit of a surprise given that we have seen quite a rise in the use of contingent labor over the past decade. In fact, one of the biggest disruptors for the staffing industry over the last 10 years or so was the influx of contingent labor, vendor management systems, and managed service provider models. And if you just look at the vendor management systems alone, use in large firms jumped up to, it was at 79% in 2019, up from just 16% back in 2006. So it has been on the rise, and we'll definitely keep an eye on this, but poll results did not indicate that this is a big driver for onboarding needs and strategies. So as we talk about these workforce strategies in 2020, we can't have the conversation without acknowledging the impact of the pandemic. Without a doubt, COVID-19 has resulted in unprecedented business disruption, and we've all seen and felt the changes and challenges that employers have been faced with this year. But maybe on a more positive note, the disruption has also created opportunity for employers and organizations. Particularly, it's created an opportunity for them to re-examine the workforce strategies. If 2020 has shown us anything, it's how quickly situations can change and how quickly organizations need to be able to adapt and have been able to adapt. And so for employers, it's really forcing an opportunity for them to look at their strategies around onboarding and workforce engagement with fresh eyes and give some thought to kind of the long-term and short-term approaches to that. So, as employers reassess their short-term and long-term needs, they're acknowledging they need different plans and strategies for short-term versus long-term for different segments of the workforce, right? And so there's kind of 3 themes that we're seeing that we want to talk about related to this topic. The first is around reskilling. Organizations have been launched into new ways of working, and that's causing them to have a need to demand different skills from their workers. And so, when we think about the HR organization of the future, reskilling is going to be a key component of that. We're not going to dive too deep into that topic today. We'll actually be touching on the HR organization of the future in an upcoming HR Market Pulse segment. And so we'll have some good conversation around reskilling when we get to that piece. So we definitely want to acknowledge that theme. We'll table that one for an upcoming conversation and focus today on the other 2 items we've got here. First is around job locations. Organizations have had to re-examine the plans and policies around where employees do work and how much flexibility they offer around that. So I want to talk a bit about what we're seeing there. And then the other theme we're seeing coming, around this is around finding the optimal labor mix. So employees are rethinking how they engage existing talent and what kind of talent they need to be looking for out in the market. And so that's where we want to focus some of our conversation today. So, Stacey, I know you have some observations around the first topic here around job design, location. So I'll pass to you to share some of what you're seeing.
All right, thanks, Kelly. So at the end of July, Google announced that it would keep all of its employees home until at least next July of 2021, which was really the first major company to make that announcement. And then, some others have followed, but really trying to offer, employees and their families, the ability to take care of, their families and stay safe, during this time. But more and more, we're seeing not just during the pandemic, but organizations really making shifts to their strategy beyond the pandemic. So increasingly, we're seeing organizations look to make remote working more widely available. A recent Willis Towers Watson survey, shows that employers expect the percentage of their full-time workforce who work from home to be 3 times larger after the pandemic, than before it began. So, just over half, around 53% of their full-time employees currently are working remotely. They expect to kind of settle that in to maybe around 22%, kind of after this pandemic passes, which is up, definitely significantly from the 7% mark, that existed before that. Recently, we've seen some other organizations share insight in terms of their strategy. So Facebook had stated that at least half of its 50,000 employees would be working from home by 2030. Companies such as Twitter and Square, they announced that employees could really work anywhere they felt kind of most creative and productive. So organizations are definitely, making shifts to this, and it's a welcome, development from an employee and workforce perspective. We're finding that while many are eager to return to their company's office, they are looking for flexible options. 65% said they would work, full-time, from home after COVID-19 once the restrictions are lifted. And 60% said they would be more likely to apply to a position that is entirely remote, as they look for a new job. So there has definitely been a shift in the market around this. And I think for some of the larger, companies, it was in their DNA to support remote working. For others, it is a bigger change in terms of needing to have more flexible, workforce, policies and approaches, as well as, just a longer term strategy for how to address, this change. It leads to conversations around, do we have, the right technologies and collaboration and productivity tools? Do we have the right, physical footprint and approach to operational issues and, the right policies and processes in place? And then certainly just the right people strategies around talent, around compensation. So those are some of the, key strategic, considerations that organizations are thinking about right now as they really look to have a long-term strategy around this. So maybe we'll shift to this last topic then. And Julie, can you share a little bit, more in terms of some of these, strategic workforce considerations and how to really balance some of the, the talent and cost considerations?
Yeah, thanks, Stacey. I'd be happy to. So what are the biggest considerations in whether to bring back former employees, to hire new talent, or to fill the gaps with freelancers or 1099s? I suspect that many HR organizations out there are making these decisions a little bit on the fly, which isn't entirely crazy given so much uncertainty out there. But there's actually a lot to unwrap here. So let's start on the talent side of the house. Lots of attention in recent years to gig workers and the flexible work preferences of younger generations, but still many roles in most companies really require known skills, a predictable work effort, and employees make up the base of your available and engaged talent at the top, until or unless the business and roles have been transformed and you find that there's a lot of skills gaps. So looking at your talent with fresh eyes, maybe you need something different than you've needed in the past. And you need to take a look at which employees still fit and where do you need a new combination of skills. But before you contemplate fresh talent, you really need to take a long, hard look at the other considerations that are listed here. Which employees or roles interact routinely with your customers? You probably want to keep that customer interaction close to the belt, and make sure that you're involved with your customer interaction directly through employees. Is the work that you need done long-term, or is it short-term? Is it repeatable or one-off? Those sorts of considerations can lead you to look at one type of worker versus another. And then we get into things like what kind of know-how is required? Can you find it easily when you need it? Is there institutional knowledge that's needed for continuity or to do things in the special way that only your company does? How much more successful is the work when it's done by an experienced team working together? So, you can just throw people together, but expecting that they'll work well together or be efficient at doing it is something that often comes with teams having experience working together. So that might be a consideration for the type of work that you have. And then does the work require some predictable coverage or schedule? Do you have availability and response time that has to be coordinated? Or is it really truly suited to just get it done by whenever without impacting other related areas? So those are some of the talent side considerations in what type of worker you might be bringing back into the fold. So let's take a look at the cost side of the house now. There is a bit of a labor equation to consider. In fact, your return to work roadmap should really be considered a bit of a business case for your planned labor mix in the short and the long term. There are entirely different talent pools and cost structures associated with returning employees, new hires, temp labor, and freelancers. So some obvious ones at the top involve the cost to find them, to vet, to onboard, and to get a person set up and prepared to do productive work. There is quite a difference in doing this for a returning employee versus a new one, and a whole different level of activity for contracted temps and freelancers on top of that. Across the bottom row, you now have some of the top pay or hard dollar considerations. The obvious ones like benefits or retirement plans and pension costs, paid time off. These are the big differentiators between employees and alternative types of workers. Most folks actually believe that a freelance worker is 20 to 30% less expensive because of these types of costs, combined with the employer portion of taxes, which alone is like 7.65%. And, on top of that, there are other employment protections that employers are obligated to offer. So you have, severance could come into play, or workers' comp and other regulations and requirements that the employers have to do or offer on behalf of their employees. But more often we see that workers in demand will pass along these costs to bridge benefits and administration and even the time and effort to find projects. So in this case, the cost might be roughly the same, with the greatest cost advantage in favor of freelancers being the utilization rate. In other words, they're not being paid when there's no work. And so that's the big differentiator. Finally, here you'll see a block for equipment and facilities, which goes along with what Stacy was saying about companies relooking the mix of on-site versus work from home roles. So quite a bit to consider, and we're interested in hearing how you're doing how you're bringing workforce and labor back as you return business to normal. Please feel free to seek out the Digital HR Connections LinkedIn site, where you can also chat and share your observations with your peers. I think that's it for this week. Take care, and we'll see you all next week. Thanks.